If you've already seen the first two videos in this series, I apologise for the delay in getting to this March section, but I was actually on holiday last week, and then the week before that I wasn't well. I mean, it was only a cold, nothing serious, but I just didn't feel up to doing a video. And if this is the first video that you've seen from this series, I guess I better explain what I'm talking about. So this year I've been following along a tutorial for making essentially a hand-stitched quilt, and each month has a different theme based around yourself and your place in the world, and also using a different technique. And the ideas for this project have come from a lady called Kathryn, and her YouTube channel is Kathryn Cloth Tales, which I'll put a link in the description below. And each month she sets the theme and suggests a method. If I just quickly show you the January and February pieces, because they are now attached attached to each other with these fabric strips. As I show you each piece, I will be joining it on, and then by the end of the year I should have 12 sections, which are kind of like an autobiography really. If you'd like more information about that project, then either just have a look at the description below, or if you've not already seen it, if you go back to the January section, I did quite a long introduction on that video talking a little bit more about this project. And while I'm talking about Kathryn and how she's helped and guided this project, I also want to thank her for helping me with my own YouTube channel, because the same day that I published my February video, she also published a video the same day, and in that video she mentioned my channel and encouraged her own subscribers to come and have a look at my channel, which is very kind and very generous of her. And as a result, I've got lots of new subscribers. So if you're here as a result of Kathryn's recommendation, thank you very much for being here and for taking an interest in what I'm doing as well. I don't generally take that much notice of the YouTube analytics, and for the most part I don't even really understand what it's trying to show me. But even I can see that since Kathryn mentioned my channel, like basically every graph you look at has kind of had like a massive spike. So I'm really grateful for that. And the theme for March, which is the one I'm going to show you today, the theme was Joyful Place, or Joyful Places. So the idea was to represent some of our favourite places to be in the world. So for example, Kathryn talked about being by the sea or in amongst the trees in sort of like woods and forests. And for me, as soon as I saw that the theme was Joyful Place, I had a very specific place in mind instantly that I knew I wanted to represent. So let me turn the camera around and I'll talk you through the different elements of what I did for my March piece to represent my joyful place. So as usual, this piece is approximately 16 inches by 16 inches, and it's very different to how Kathryn's piece looks for this month, which is normal for me. I kind of take her theme and I try and use her suggested method of sewing, but then I very much go my own way in how I interpret that. And as I mentioned in the introduction, when I saw that the theme was Joyful Place, I instantly knew where I wanted to represent. So as you can see in this corner, there's a map of a place called Ardmore, which is on the south coast of Ireland. It's kind of halfway roughly between Cork and Waterford. So that was the place I had in mind. And as I said, Kathryn talked about, you know, being by the sea and about being in the woods. So she was kind of thinking more in terms about what types of places bring her joy, whereas I was thinking of one very specific place. And the method that she suggested for the month was cloth weaving, and I had never done cloth weaving before, but basically you've got strips of cloth, sort of horizontal and vertical, and then they're just weaved together. And the way that Kathryn did it, she had, if I remember rightly, sort of blues and tans to kind of represent sea and sand, and she had those as her horizontals, and then she had green strips for the verticals to represent the woodlands. But of course, once those colours are all weaved together, it's kind of like a 3-colour checkerboard, really. And I really wanted to represent a scene. So I didn't just want the colours to be symbolic of those places. I wanted it to actually create some kind of scene. And I put a lot of overthinking into what colours to do my strips and how to do the strips of cloth. And for quite a while I had horizontals which represented kind of the land and the beach and the sea, but I didn't quite know how to get the verticals to be able to give me what I was looking for. But eventually I kind of figured out that actually if I did several separate verticals, so I've ended up with, you know, my horizontals are like one complete piece all the way across, but the verticals are actually in 3 pieces. So I've got this kind of brownish colour for the vertical here, and then I've got a beige for the beach, and then I've got a pale blue which kind of goes up through the sea and into the sky. And there was a little bit of fiddling around with that because I had to make sure that where the different sections joined together, that they were hidden behind one of the horizontals. So there was a lot of fiddling about. But eventually I got my background cloth weaving to a point where I was happy. You know, I had my land, my beach, my sea and my sky. I'm going to try and talk you through it in the order that I actually did the different stages. I might get them a little muddled, but I'll try and keep it roughly in order. So this little black square, in Kathryn's tutorial, she actually did a red square, which was to represent herself, if I remember rightly. And she did this kind of border around, which made kind of like a little 9 patch. So you've got, with the cloth weaving, you've got 9 sort of squares here, and she'd put herself in the centre. And it's a while since I watched that video, because obviously it's now October and I did this back in March, but I think she said that the sort of the line around was to kind of represent that kind of bubble of kind of, you know, feeling safe and secure in your special places. Now I did something quite different here. I kept there being a different colour square in the middle and the box around the 9. But this black square, I already knew when I depicted this place that I wanted to include some black rocks that were on the beach. And I'd sort of imagined myself doing the rocks as sort of triangular-ish sort of shapes, and, you know, fairly accurate to the actual shape of the rocks on the beach. But when I saw the video where she was talking about having this square within a square, I thought, well, this is a way that I can do these black rocks in a more symbolic way. The reason that the black rocks are significant to me, if I can talk about it without it being too morbid, that was actually the spot where I scattered my husband's ashes. And I know that sounds a strange thing to include in something that is supposed to be about a joyful place, But my husband and I had been to this place 4 times and we absolutely loved it. Like, it was the most special place for us. And that is why I chose to scatter his ashes there. So although that particular action was extremely difficult and extremely sad, it's still part of my memories of this very special place. And I don't know how else to describe that. I guess if you've scattered a loved one's ashes in a special place, perhaps you'll have a similar feeling, but I don't really know how to express that. And one of the things that I did on that day when I scattered his ashes was I made a wreath out of weeds and wildflowers from the area. So that's what I've represented here. And although the black square is very symbolic of the stones, the rocks, I've tried to do the wreath pretty accurately with the placement of the flowers. So initially I did the green wreath. I think it was like bindweed that I'd used, and just kind of sort of wrapped it around itself to kind of make this ring. So then when I did the stitching, I did the green stitching for the wreath first, and I'll put a picture up for that. And I used variegated green thread so that I could have variation, the clue's in the name, without having to keep switching colours. And then I added the flowers on top. So there was 1 purple flower, which I've no idea what it was, 3 poppies, and 8 kind of daisies that I'd kind of woven in to that ring. And when I did scatter the ashes, and then I put the wreath into the water, and it was actually quite therapeutic just watching the flowers just back and forth in the tide. Again, I don't really know how to express that. And for me, this idea of this being in a box is because this was one very specific memory, whereas everything else kind of represents the culmination of all the different memories that we made in this place. Whereas this is kind of isolated, so it's kind of boxed in. That's my own reasoning of how I've used the symbolism of this being in a box. And this is actually the log cabin that we stayed in. Every time we went to this place, we didn't just stay in the same town, we stayed in the exact same place. It was just the most lovely, calm, beautiful place. And part of that was the accommodation, part of it was the location. It was just wonderful. Now, in my February video, I talked a little bit about log cabins as a quilting block design style, and that is what I used to make this actual log cabin. And I did say I'd talk a little bit more about the traditions around how the log cabin block is designed. So if I just move this over a second, and if you've seen the February video, you will have already seen me do this little demonstration. But basically you start off with a square in the centre, and then you kind of attach strips to the side, so each strip becomes longer than the previous one, because you're then doing it the full width of the new block. So it just grows and grows and grows as much as you want it to. Let's just do one more round. And the tradition is, which is something else that I learnt from Kathryn, because I'd never even heard of this before, is that the centre square should be red. I mean, I say should, I mean that's like the traditional thing. which represents the hearth of the home. And as you can see, I did actually do a red square in the centre. And in this instance, inside the cabin, there was like a log burner, but the supply of fuel was actually peat. So we were burning peat in this little stove. So when I think about the hearth of the home, obviously I think about that little peat stove that we used. And the times when we stayed there wasn't really cold enough to use it. But there was one time we were like, oh, it's a little bit chilly, let's light the stove, because we just wanted to have that fire, and it was just lovely. But because it was such a small cabin, and the peat fire kicked out so much heat that we ended up having to have the door and the windows open because it was just too hot in there. So again, you know, that even though that is just the traditional centre for a log cabin block to be red, that memory is just another special memory in the tapestry of memories that we created in this place. And then the other tradition with this is that the idea that one side you do light colours and then the other side you do dark colours. So the strips on this side, for example, you would do darker. And that's what I've done here with this. I mean, they're both fairly dark, to be honest, but I've got a lighter grey this side and a darker grey this side. And I added into that a blue frame, because this is actually supposed to be the side of the building, and there was a window with a blue window frame. And then when I came to doing the roof, I just tried as best I could to figure out how to do the log cabin sort of block, but just as a triangle rather than a square. And when I first made this block, I did actually make it a full square and then with the triangle on top, but it made the building look far too tall. So I ended up kind of chopping part of the original square off so that I could join the roof kind of slightly lower to get better proportions for how the cabin looked. The only downside of that is it's very bulky here, where I'd kind of cut it and turned it, and then I've got the roof part underneath as well. But it was a little bit tricky sewing through that because it was so bulky. Okay, and then the next thing that I did, I think after that, is I added a little bit more detail to the sky. And I don't know if you can tell, but the white squares in the sky are slightly raised. So when the background had been put together with the weaving, everything had been sort of basted down to kind of just hold it in place. But when I came to doing something in the sky, I actually took the basting out so that I could put something else underneath the white squares. So I had little strips of white cloth that I folded up and kind of tucked inside and then stitched round, and I put a stitch through the middle. And my idea was that it would be a little bit like, you know, when you have like a button in upholstery and then the upholstery fabric sort of puffs up around the button. Well, that was kind of the effect I was going for on the clouds, and I didn't quite manage it. I mean, it would have been better if I'd put actual stuffing in there rather than just a bit of folded fabric, but I know there are square puffy clouds. And what kind of joyful place is complete without square puffy clouds? And then I think the next thing I did after that was the texture on the beach. I don't know if that shows up, but if not, I'll put a close-up photo. And the beach is just covered with several different shades of beachy kind of colours of just seed stitch and French knots to kind of get the texture of, you know, sand and little stones and shells and whatnot. And then on one of the weeks in the tutorial, Kathryn was talking about using pieces of gold fabric or thread to symbolise like special moments. I decided to do these 5 pieces of gold ribbon, and it's actually 2 pieces of ribbon like layered on top of each other. There's like a narrow one and a slightly wider one, and that is to represent the 5 times that I've been to this place. So the first 4 times I went with my husband, and then the 5th time was when I scattered his ashes. And if you can see, there's Roman numerals on these, and initially I did think about putting the year, you know, each year that we'd been there. So the first year we went there was actually in 2000, but it was our 3rd wedding anniversary. So instead of putting 2000, I just did the Roman numerals for 3 because it was our 3rd anniversary. So as you can see, we went there for our 3rd, our 5th, our 7th and our 10th anniversary, and we'd actually already booked to go again for our 15th, and it was just 3 months before that my husband died. So I'd already booked to go, and I still wanted to go, and I knew that this would be, you know, if I was going to scatter his ashes anywhere, this was the place that he would have wanted. I did actually think about doing this one a different colour, because obviously my experience of going to this place, you know, I took my mum and dad with me. You know, I should have been there with my husband for our 15th wedding anniversary. But in its own strange way, it was still special, because I was able to take my mum and dad to all the special places that Trevor and I had been, and I was able to talk about all the lovely memories. So although I am talking about that a lot in this video, in general, that doesn't overshadow all the happy times we had here. This is still a really special place to me, and I hope to one day go back there again. I think the next thing that I did was to do these waves, and they were done with 2 pieces of cloth twined together. So I've got this kind of turquoisey blue sort of colour and white twined together for the waves, and then I've kind of echoed the shape of the waves with some gold chain stitch. I don't know if that will show up the detail, but if not, I'll put up a picture. And then to finish off the sea, I did running stitch in various shades of blue, which generally runs horizontally, but obviously it follows the curve of the waves a little bit as well. Then I also did running stitch, but in a vertical direction for the land, and this is in a sort of a variegated green. And I did this running stitch vertically, partly because this cabin was on a cliff, so I wanted to kind of have some kind of upward direction to the land, and also it's kind of like grass. I mean, it doesn't look like blades of grass, but you know, we'll just pretend. And then the last thing to mention before we move on to the map is this little cluster here of these little buttons. So I've got 3 round buttons, and then this little one which is actually a shell. Now this isn't technically a button, I suppose, because it's only got 1 hole, and I think I got this years ago with a card making kit. But anyway, I stitched through the 1 hole, and then where the narrow point of the shell is, it had sort of grooves like on a shell, so I kind of stitched over those grooves as well. And the significance of this little cluster is, here are three little stones which are represented by the 3 buttons. And I believe it was the very first time that my husband and I went to Ardmore that we collected these stones, and for many years we had them on our bathroom windowsill. And then the last time that I went to Ardmore, when I was with my mum and dad, I found this shell on the beach, and it was the last day we were there. We were just going for our last walk on the beach before we left at the end of the holiday, and I was just walking, you know, just along the edge as the waves were sort of coming in on the sand, and I found this shell, and it's not the prettiest. It's quite crusty and a little bit broken, but I think I'm pretty safe to say that this is the biggest shell that I've ever actually found on a beach. So yeah, so those little natural souvenirs are very special, and they're now displayed in my downstairs loo. So whenever anybody goes in, they're just on a little tray next to the hand soap. So now we can move on to the map. And I love this map. I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but it's really quite thick and very quilty, if I can use that expression. There's so many layers. I mean, obviously we've got the backing layer, the layers of the woven fabric. There's this kind of beigey brown backing, and the beige that I've actually done the map on, and then where I've sort of stitched through multiple layers to do the roads and the land outline, it just makes it like really nice and kind of padded. I just love it. I'm so happy with the map. And if I show you this little leaflet, which is an actual official leaflet from the place, and you can see that I've tried to copy the lettering for Ardmore, and I've done the map the other way up so that I could put the name of the place in this kind of bay, and also that it's north is up, whereas on this one north is down. And yeah, so you can see I've, as best I can, I've marked the roadways, and I've done little French knots, little red French knots for places of special interest, and some of these are the same as on the official map. I mean, you can see there's lots of places of interest. If I talk you through all the different places on the map, we will be here forever, because there are so many lovely spots in this place. But as you can see, some of the places of interest are very, very old. And I mean, there's the round tower and the cathedral, which is from the 12th century. Over here we've got St Declan's Well, which is talking about, you know, the 5th century, and then up to the Second World War lookout. So there's a real range of historical interest here. And this isn't the first time that I've depicted this map. A couple of years ago, when I did Inktober, one of the days there was a prompt for map, and again I did Ardmore, but instead of just doing dots for the places of interest, I did extra little sketches of some of the interesting places. And I was very tempted to do extra, like, stitched sketches of some of these places, and then I thought, no, it's busy enough already, there's enough going on. And I thought, for me, for the memories the map and the dots on their own is enough for me to bring back the memories of all these different places. Then can you see in the corner I've done a key and I've got a blue line which is for the roads, and then there's a green dotted line which is for like the footpath. So you may or may not be able to see, I've got a green dotted line around here which was for the cliff walk. Red French knots for places of interest, and then the little yellow stitches for the beach. Now some of the French knots for places of interest are the official ones on the map, and some are ones that I've added myself. So most obviously there's one here which represents the cabin where we stayed. So this along here is basically a cliff, and then there was a boat cove and a little pier, and we were just right on that edge just looking out to sea. It was just amazing, and I don't know how to put into words what it was like, but you can probably guess from the way I'm talking about it that I really love this place. So I think that is just about everything that I've included on here. There is so much more I wanted to include, but it's enough. It's enough for me to bring back all those lovely memories. I don't need to put every single memory into stitch form. This is enough. You know, I can visualize walking this route. I mean, we did this walk around the cliff and these special points of interest so many times. The other thing that I will mention, the couple of the little red dots which are sort of near the edge of the map, they're not necessarily to scale. Like, I think this one should be further this way and this one should be further this way, but again, they were special places that I wanted to include without making the map too big. So now that I've talked you through all of that, I can now join this on to my January and February piece, but hopefully the April piece will be much quicker, and I hope you will come back soon to see that too. Alright, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. See you soon.